Hey, what's up everybody? BDF 44 coming into another video. Alright, I got 14 minutes to talk, but I should be able to cut this off in 14 minutes and have more time to talk because the video I'm uploading is uploading rather quickly, so that's good. In fact, the process is already going. I probably should have waited, but yeah, man. Figured I'd walk down the street, walk home for this one. Still having that itch about buying some edibles, man. That has not gone away. I still legitimately want to try something that's gonna put my head in the space, but when do I take that? Before I leave the house? When I get home? After I work out? Before I work out? It's just, this ain't the era for that. It really ain't. And I really, I'm probably gonna just pass by another one of these places without going in it. That's what I feel like I'm gonna do. But either way, man, just wanted to be honest about that, man. I've really been having the itch. So, nothing really on my mind. I don't even know why I turned on the camera, to be honest with you. Just figured I'd turn it on, turn it on. And I guess the last thing I read was something about people getting on Drake about saying the N-word now. I guess, you know, it's understood that Kendrick Lamar put that in his song, and a lot of people are upset at Kendrick for doing that to Drake because, of course, Drake's dad is black. And what does that say for the other biracial people? But I think he's talking more so about cultural. He doesn't agree that Drake, I don't know why I say coach. He doesn't believe that Drake should be saying the N-word because of how he feels Drake behaves in the presence of others, and then how he switches it up in the presence of blacks. I think that's what they were saying. They're alluding to. Now, I ain't never met Drake in my life. I ain't never met Kendrick in my life. I don't know who's culturally what, and Drake has contributed quite a bit to this thing we call hip-hop, so I'm not really sure if I'm the guy to say he's not the guy that should be able to say the N-word. But, you know, it probably sounds a lot better if it's not coming out of anyone's mouth, really. I always felt like that word, it wasn't really riddled in anything loving. We being a lot of black folks who use it, turned it into a positive from a negative. But if you're going to say the word to people and you don't want them to say it back to you without wanting to punch them in the face, it's probably not something that should be just said in general. But, you know, I'm not going to be a hypocrite say I don't use the word. I just don't know if I'm the guy to tell Drake he shouldn't say it, and I don't know if that's my expertise, or to say who's culturally what. Because when you start talking about culturally should you be able to say it, then you got to start looking at people who are fully black, who have both black parents, who are not from the culture, and saying the same thing to them if you want to start doing that. So seems to me that we've drawn the line at the only people who can say it are people who have black in their family, who are half black or quarter black. Those are the only ones they want, or fully black, and Fat Joe. Those are the only people that they've allowed to say it without any static. I do not know about cultural energy in the Bronx, where Fat Joe is from. I do not know how much African American he may have in his family. So it's not comfortable for me to sit up here and say anything about somebody of whom I just don't know. But it doesn't feel comfortable when I hear it coming from people who are not black. I heard some Hispanic dudes saying it to each other. I don't think they even were aware that they were being offensive. On the bus yesterday, on the way home, they were saying it over and over and over again, but I don't think they know how to address each other in any other way. They're probably like 16, 17 years old. So for me, it's just like, unless you want to do a whole history lesson, a teaching lesson, pull out books and all different types of stuff, sit down and talk to somebody for several days in a row. When they're used to saying the word to each other, whether they're black or not, depending on where they're from, they're kind of not going to understand why you're upset. Now, you can punch them in the face if you want. If you want to pick up an assault charge and make a point, that's one thing. But, you know, the way these kids are these days, they pull out a gun in your life right there. So how much does it matter to you, you know? That's what it really comes down to. I think at the end of the day, if we respect one another to the best of our ability, we'll learn to educate one another on what makes us offended and what doesn't. You know, I saw a man who was looking at me while I was on the bus, and he was essentially saying with his eyes, are you going to let them talk like that? And the answer is, I'm not their father. It's not my responsibility to teach them how not to offend others. They're going to run into whoever they run into, and then they're going to have to try to explain that to whoever would otherwise be offended. But for myself, I'm too old to be offended by the thoughts of children. That's kind of how I look at it. Now, you say it's going to be a different story because you're in your 60s. You know what I mean? You are old enough to know better. And I don't think you walk around saying it every 3 words like they do. But, you know, when it really comes down to it, it's not great when anybody who's not black says it. And it's probably not great when people who are black say it, even though we are culturally accustomed to allowing one another to say it. I grew up in a household where my mother did not want to hear it. She didn't like the word. She would call it out when she heard other black people say it. So I was raised in a household where that's a word that she didn't go for. She would cause a scene when she'd hear other black people say it, which was really, really irritating to me, personally. Because I'm like, man, this word ain't that serious. If they black, they can say it. My mom did not feel that way at all. And so that's the household I come out of, where it wasn't okay to say the N-word if you black. But, you know, just the same, I grew up around a lot of different people, and I ended up using the word myself. And, you know, I also find myself holding on to that double standard that if I'm doing math any other way, I don't agree with it. You know what I mean? So it's like, some point in time, you got to get out of your own hypocrisy. Cultural norms will have you a hypocrite a lot of the time. And that's one of those things that separate us. It truly separates us. And then it doesn't vet properly who is offending, who wants to offend you, who doesn't. Because a lot of times, if you let that be the barrier for which you will accept people to be decent and not, there are a lot of people who will never call you the N-word, who will systematically push a black person out of anything, who will do all types of stuff to us. They'll never utter the N-word because they don't want the drama that come with it. But in their minds, they hate us. And then there are other people who are saying the word because they heard Tupac say it in a song. They don't cancel somebody because they listening to the stuff that is being placed upon them in their culture to make them feel like it's cool. Everybody who they look up to says that word. And it's never wrapped in that word, you can't say this word if you're this. You can't say this word if you're that. So if they don't have nobody telling them, hey, this is going to be offensive, this is a word that shouldn't come out of your mouth, then why would they otherwise have it in their head that they shouldn't say it? And so it just becomes a situation where it's like, if you ain't had those conversations with the subject in front of you, then you're just going to be assaulting somebody or vetting improperly who you think hates you versus who doesn't. Not everybody who says words hate you, and not everybody who refrains from saying the word means you good. Means the best for you. It's not that simple. So I don't think it does a proper job of vetting us, and if anything, it's just an evil in place to make us separate and make us look at one another sideways and make us offend one another. And no other race has nothing like that on them. If I say a bad word about a certain race, you're going to know I mean harm. But when you say that word about me or to me or around me, now I got to figure out if you're a good guy or not. Now I got to figure out if you intend to offend me. Now I got to figure out if you even know that word is offensive. And then got to try to determine if I want to be a history teacher or not. You know what I'm saying? To a bunch of kids who probably don't respect anything come out of my mouth anyway, because they don't hardly respect anything at all in a lot of cases. They don't respect themselves. So it's like, how much does this matter to you? If you ain't ready to give your life for it, or if you ain't ready to teach somebody for it, if you ain't willing to take the time to teach, then you're going to be sitting there offended, and it ain't going to lead to nothing good that you're ready for. And so that's what it really comes down to. You pick your battles. I would prefer people who are not black just don't say it. But who's black? You know what I'm saying? Who's black? Because some people don't look black. They quote unquote passing. They don't look like they have any black in them at all. But they have plenty. And, you know, and then there are people who are fully black who don't know any black people because they grew up in a culture where there wasn't no black people around but them. And they could say it. What? How'd that work? And there's people like Drake who have both. And they have to figure out from place to place who's going to look at them sideways for saying it, or have to continue to reinforce that they are black enough. Which is a problem I don't know nothing about, but I've heard people complain about it. I can imagine it's a headache for biracial people who try to figure out if they black enough to say it around certain African Americans, or assume that they are, and then they're getting confronted like Kendrick's doing to Drake. I don't feel comfortable doing it because I feel like it creates a problem that I can't relate to. You know what I mean? If I'm gonna go up to somebody who's half black or quarter black and say, yo, you can't say the N-word, I know that I have privilege upon them because I can always go anywhere and say it and not be held accountable except for in front of my mother. You know what I mean? Or anybody who feels like her, who are far and in between. So it's like, it's almost like I'm weaponizing my privilege against them in its own way. And if I don't like that when it's done to me by others, then I'm not going to do it to my biracial brothers and sisters. So the way I see it is, if I can identify you as black, then automatically you have a right to not only say the word, but be offended by it. And anytime you say that word, you understand that you are offending your own people, whether you're culturally black or not. You know that when they say that word and they talking about who they hate, the people who use it who hate, they're talking about you too. As long as you fall into that category, then by way of what I'm used to, it's your word to use. If one of them boys say that word to you and it stings, then it's your word to use. If one of them boys say that word and it doesn't sting, then it's probably going to be offensive when it comes out of your mouth. It's that simple. If you're not offended by it and it don't directly affect you and the people that you come from, then it's probably not your word to use. That's probably how that goes. And that's a hypocrisy I don't agree with. But it is the culture that we live in America. It is what we've done with the word. You gotta understand, man, sometimes that word was the last thing people heard before they were strung up. Sometimes that was the last thing people heard before they were R-word or S.A. assaulted in that way. Like sometimes people sold people away, and that was the last thing they heard before they sold their son away, sold their daughter away, like we do with puppies and kittens. Like, you gotta understand what that word really represents. It's the furthest belittling of a person you can do to them right before you treat them as badly as you can treat them. That's what it was for. To dehumanize and further make a person feel like they ain't worth anything. So when you use that word in a positive light, you got to understand what it was created for and what it's going to hurt. Who it's going to hurt when they hear it. If it comes out of your spirit and you ain't African of any kind. You see what I'm saying? If you Caucasian, you got to know how that word was used by your people to put us down. And it ain't just as simple as something that you could relate to, because you don't really have a word like that, and you don't really have a system that is in place to put you down, with that word being universally understood as the way to do it, amongst other things. That's why it's kind of difficult to try to explain it to people who don't feel offended with their race in any way. It's like they don't have nothing that would otherwise make it so that they should. If anything, it's no different than calling somebody a B word or any other type of word. But when you got a word like the F word for the LBGT community, they can kind of get it to a degree, because that word doesn't mean nothing positive. It's meant to put them down every time. So if that word is being used by them and they want to turn it into something positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that when they hear me say it, it's going to hit that way, because I'm not a part of their community, and it ain't going to sting me if somebody call me that, because it ain't true. I don't represent what that otherwise should be. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's the only thing I can equate it to. Every other racial slur is only used in a negative light, except for the one that we use, and we turn it upside down into positive, but it still don't feel positive when people who don't look like us use it. People who don't come from where we come from, who are not affected by it, who are not hurt by that, when they hear it from somebody who genuinely hates us, they ain't talking about them. They ain't looking at you, sending it your way. So that's pretty much all I have time to say, man. My name is BDF 44. I thank y'all for watching. I'm out.